Comics, baby. I am the bounty hunter, Joe Getcho.
And I'm Mike White, and this is the Clean Comic Book Podcast. We like comics because they have no bones. Find us on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast, or on Blue Sky Social or X at Boneless Comics One, and use the hashtag Boneless Comics Podcast to join the conversation and share your thoughts. And on that note, we actually have gotten a lot of comments across various platforms this time. So make sure that you, if you enjoy this episode, go to the after show. We're probably going to read your comments out loud. Yeah, so definitely make sure to check that out afterwards.
That's right. So our boneless review today is going to be about Star Wars Jango Fett Open Seasons, which is composed of 4 issues that were released between May and September 2002, compiled into a trade paperback edition in 2003, written by Hayden Blackman, penciled by Ramon Bachs, and originally published by Dark Horse Comics, but now it's owned by Disney and Marvel, like, you know, everything is these days.
Of course. And again, after listening to today's review, make sure to check out the after show on YouTube, where we're going to discuss the writer and penciler, take you on an even deeper dive into Jango Fett himself, and of course, give a shout out to all of your comments. So thank you, everybody, for all of those.
Yes, thank you.
Comics, baby.
So if you only know Jango Fett from the Attack of the Clones movie, the armored bounty hunter and his father of Boba Fett and the entire clone army, like that guy over there, then get ready, because you're in for a story that makes that one look small by comparison. Jango's not just a cool character, he's possibly one of the fiercest warriors who ever lived, at least in the Star Wars universe. And every betrayal that he survives feeds directly into the war that tears the galaxy apart in the following movies. So the comic itself, the story is actually set 36 years prior to the movie, and it opens with Darth Tyrannus, who that is his Sith title and name. He is actually
set prior to which movie? Sorry, so it's 36 years prior to. Oh, okay, gotcha. All right, Go ahead. Sorry.
So the comic story here is set 36 years prior to the Attack of the Clones movie.
Okay.
And it opens with Darth Tyrannus, which that's basically his Sith title and name, but he's a Serenian nobleman named Count Dooku, which is probably the more familiar name that you're used to. So he arrives in a tower where he's greeted by the shadowy figure of Lord Sidious, secret leader of the Sith. And Dooku tells his master that he's been testing warriors to find a prime clone, and his instincts tell him the survivor will be Jango Fett, last of the Mandalorians. So through flashbacks, we learn about Jango's past. He was raised on the agricultural planet Concord Dawn, where his father served as local law enforcement. At that time in the comics, Mandalorian society was split into 2 groups: the true Mandalorians, led by Manda-Lore Jester Muriel, and the Death Watch under Tor Vizsla. So when Jango was 8 years old, Vizsla had started a coup that brought the conflict to Jango's farm, where basically his family was executed, but Jango was rescued by Jaster, so the J's are together, and his second in command, Montross. After blowing up Vizsla's tank and leaving him for dead, Jango also shoots Vizsla's second in command right through the chest. So right away, at 8 years old, you know, he's got this huge traumatic experience that happens. So years later, he's been fighting alongside Jaster's true Mandalorians. Jango rose quickly in skill and leadership, getting his first command mission at age 14. But unfortunately, some bad intel led to an ambush by Vizsla, who survived the explosion on Concord Dawn. Montross bails, Jaster is killed, and Jango assumes leadership of the true Mandalorians as Manda-Lore. So Manda-Lore, it's like Mand''Alor. Manda-Lore is a title. Manda-Lore is a planet, and Mandalorians is the people. So there's a lot of similar words that get confusing. There's a lot of similar names like Jaster and Jango that get, and then there's also the visuals of all their colors and similar looking outfits. So there's a lot to keep track of in this one. Just
to be clear, Manda-Lore hyphenated is like Jor-El, where it's like one name, but it's got a hyphen,
Manda-Lore.
and it's Mand Allure. Okay.
Right. Whereas the planet is
Okay.
Mandalore, Mandalore, Mandalore. And they
Wow.
are Mandalorians. And the guy in
Okay.
the Mandalorian TV show that's recent is called Mando for short.
Reed
But
Richards.
but he's
Oh,
the only one.
Mando.
Yes,
Sorry.
Reed Richards is the only one called Mando. I mean, not Reed Richards. Din Djarin.
Maxwell Lord.
Yes. All right, we got to get through this story synopsis.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So we're going to fast forward 8 more years, and Death Watch lures the true Mandalorians, now being led by Jango, to the planet Galadrin, and they start spreading rumors about their activities, and they call the Jedi for help. So Jedi Master Dooku shows up with his Padawan and a whole bunch of Jedi Knights, and things escalate so fast that the Jedi basically wipe out every single last one of the true Mandalorians, except for Jango, who again survives. But he gets captured and sold into slavery. So at the age of 22, he's captured, sold into slavery. All of the people of his tribe have been wiped out by the Jedi, and he was betrayed by the planet's governor. He's really not having a great life. Um,
No,
so
no, it's not.
so then, back in the present day of the comic, a meetup takes place between Count Dooku, the Sith Lord, and Jango Fett, who's now 34 years old, if you're keeping track. And Dooku
Okay.
says that I was misguided. You know, the death of the last of the true Mandalorians was also the last of my foolish errands for the Senate and the Jedi. And Jango's like, doesn't sound like an apology. Like, dude, you executed all my men, but you're worried that your employer sent you on a foolish mission? Like,
Yeah.
hello, bigger stakes. So Django's not happy. Uses the he uses the electromagnetic gloves that he's got to pull his blasters to his hands, kind of like a Jedi would do, but it's technology. He
Yeah.
reveals that he's seeded the room with plague spores, leaving Dooku 40 minutes before blindness and death. Seemingly desperate, Dooku bargains for the cure and asks what became of Jango after Galadrin. Like, you have 40 minutes to live and you want to ask questions? So Jango's like, okay, sure, no problem. So basically, Jango's like, he rotted on a spice slave transport for a few years. Spice is a drug, it's the common drug of the Star Wars universe. He rotted there for a few years until pirates raided, and then he escaped in the crossfire. But for whatever reason, the governor of Galadrin kept Jango's suit and paid to have it restored, paid to have the colors changed from red to blue, and decided to go all out and deck it out with some cool weaponry. So of course, that's the first place that Jango goes, and he's lying in wait to find out where Vizsla and the Death Watch went on to next. So he recovers his suit with an upgrade and finds out where Vizsla is and heads on. So, 2, 3 years on a slave ship, and now he's back in action. All right, gonna find Vizsla. So he catch up with him. He bursts into Vizsla's ship like a rocket, and we see this long, epic fight scene over like 10 pages with very minimal dialogue. But then Django's injured and he's about to lose. He slashes Vizsla across the chest, just enough for the nearby pack of space tigers to rip him to shreds. And then, but they leave Jango alone because they think he's dead. So then once he recovers, Jango sets off to find a job. And that's kind of the end of the flashback sequence. So then we get a little bit in the present that says, Dooku's like, well, I used the living force to purge the plague from my system, so I'm actually okay. While Jango
Yeah.
was monologuing, but he's like, but I'll still keep my word. So, in addition to money, though, Django demands one thing: one unaltered clone, free of tampering, to carry on Jaster's legacy. With that, he agrees to follow Tyrannus to Camino and to make sure that he gets paid. And that's
El
pretty
Camino.
much, yeah, El Camino. That's pretty much what you need to know for our story. It's a very basic version, but I tried to trim it down so that the whole
Mhm.
episode wasn't the synopsis because there's a lot of stuff that happens. So,
Sure.
we'll take a quick break and come right back to discuss.
We like comics because they have no bones.
Comics.
So, for this story specifically, because it is set in a very specific time period of Star Wars, that I did see the movie that, was before and after,
A while ago.
but it's been so long since I watched those that I was confused by a lot of things at first. And but the thing that's the funniest was the name Jaster. So the main character in Rogue Galaxy, which is made by Level 5, the guys that did Dark Cloud 2, those
Hmm.
games on the PS2, the main character is Jaster Rogue. And so you hear
Ah,
Jaster Rogue for like an 80-hour game, which I played all the way through on the PS2, and then I played the PS4 version. So like when I hear Jaster, I think of this doofy looking space pirate guy that I have the picture of here, where he's sort of like this desert space pirate guy. So there, I mean, it also was a sci-fi franchise where you're like going to different planets
hmm.
and sort of doing things similar to what they would do in Star Wars things too. So that like really messed me up just because that name specifically I associate with something totally different. So I kept having to go when they say Jaster, no, it's not that blonde-haired kid. It's
It's
actually
Jaster
it's actually
Mareel
this
from
yeah, it's actually this
Manda-Lore.
other guy. But I didn't like see his last name in the story, the Mariel or whatever. They just kept saying Jaster. So in my
Hmm.
mind, I just kept saying, oh yeah, Jaster Rogue. Okay. And there were other guys where I was like Lord Tyrannus or Tyrannus, however you say it.
Tyrannus, yeah.
I I was like, I'm pretty sure by the way that they're drawing him that that's Christopher Lee. So I think that he's Count Dooku. And then I was like, I feel like I remember us talking about this before, and Dooku is like that was his name when he was a politician or something, and then his
Hmm.
Sith Lord name is Tyrannus or something like that. So some of that stuff started coming back to me. Um, just the appearance of Sidious made me go, oh yeah, that's the Emperor, that's Palpatine or whatever. So
Yeah.
again, these are things that like I haven't had that strong canon connection to them over like watching a lot of recent stuff, and it's kind of
Hmm.
been years and years since I watched it. So I was
Yeah.
trying to track all of it. I feel like I did pretty well for the most part, but yeah, the name Jaster for whatever reason, I was just like,
Well,
I just
there's
can't
a
get that other character out of my head.
there's a lot of like really subtle things that if you don't really like get your head around it, it sort of doesn't make sense until it does. So like Anakin Skywalker, when Anakin Skywalker is, basically burned to crispy bacon, he is
Yeah,
he becomes a Sith and he becomes Darth Vader. So
right.
his name is Darth Vader, and that is his Sith name. So whenever a Sith becomes a Sith, they get a new name. So Count Dooku was Dooku previously. He's only a count because of his homeworld where he basically political blah blah blah. He is a count.
Sure,
That
sure.
is a
Yeah.
real title he has because he has like a brother and they're royalty and blah blah blah. But Count Dooku is his real name, but Darth Tyrannus is his Sith name.
Yeah,
So
so they call him Lord Tyrannus and not Darth
yeah, Sith
Tyrannus. And I wondered
Lord.
if that mattered or if that was some
It's
distinction or if you have to earn the Darth
it's
or
kind of like
yeah.
it's kind of like a Jedi Knight is a position, and so is a
Hmm.
Jedi Master. And so they call themselves Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi
Okay,
Knight Anakin Skywalker. So then you have Sith Lord Tyrannus. So he
sure.
is sure he is Darth Tyrannus, but he's also, it's like rather than be Captain Tyrannus or Lieutenant
Okay.
Tyrannus, it's like his position is Darth and he is a Sith Lord. So 'cause it's kind of weird because it's like, how many names does this guy need? How many names
Well,
do we
are
need
there
to
like
know?
Sith ensigns or like people that are like on the dark side, but they're like not very good at it yet?
Well, it's like the
Or-
Padawans on the light
Oh,
side.
okay.
So if
Yeah.
they have a Padawan, or an
Okay.
apprentice. I guess apprentice would
Yeah.
be the more neutral term. But the thing is too is that Count Dooku, which is his public persona, he wants to be known by
Hmm.
that because the Sith are in hiding. So if he says, "Hey, I'm Darth Tyrannus," they're
Right.
going to be like, "It's a Sith. I thought they were extinct." So that's part of the secrecy too. That's why you really don't hear Darth Tyrannus very often or Lord Tyrannus or whatever Tyrannus
Right.
because it would expose that he is a Sith Lord and he kind of wants to keep that on the DL.
So it makes sense that only Sidious is addressing him that way in the sequences where they're kind of removed from everybody else. I
Right.
remember it being a reveal that he was a Sith Lord in Attack of the Clones. I do remember that.
Hmm.
Like somewhere towards the end of the movie. And then of course he has to fight Yoda, if I
Yeah.
recall. properly. So I do remember that. Of course, you get Christopher Lee. You definitely want to make him a count or a lord or something because he's a very Shakespearean actor. No
Yeah.
child
Well,
of mine shall eat candy.
and that's the thing is like a lot of this stuff that's really rich in the storytelling really
Mhm.
came afterwards. And so Star Wars is really like a whole bunch of, I wouldn't call them retcons quite as much, but as more of like, here was a throwaway character or here was a character. And so they inserted a
Mhm.
backstory and people went, that makes sense. And then it became canon or it became
Okay.
head canon in Legends. And then Disney said, "Pfft, we're doing something different. But
Yeah.
the character is a fully fleshed out character from beginning to end, but that took, 10, 20, 30 years to accomplish. Whereas, if we see Jango Fett in a movie and he's just this kind of like anonymous bounty hunter, and then suddenly he's got a backstory, suddenly he's got missions he
Right.
goes on, suddenly he's got a new persona in the books where he is now this Mandalorian warrior who teaches an entire, he doesn't just they don't just clone him for the army. He actually teaches the army the Mandalorian ways. So the true Mandalorians are dead, but he can pass on Jaster's legacy to
Right.
these clones about brotherhood and working together and all this stuff. So it becomes a really rich story, but it's after, a comic and a movie and a book and a
Mhm.
video game and all the layers.
Yeah, I appreciated how they were sort of fleshing out canon with this. I did notice the Legends title on the cover of all four
Hmm.
issues. And at the time, that triggered my memory of when we did go through the Star Wars retrospective, and you saying like, well, this is the stuff that it used to kind of be considered canon, but now it's either in flux or not really because, Disney is kind of going its own way with
Yeah.
Star Wars and they're kind of telling new stories. So they if they overwrite something from Legends, well then it's not canon anymore. But I kind of I think more than anything else that we've looked at, I felt the kind of loss that Star Wars fans must feel at losing some of this material when I was reading this one. Because I was like, he's actually an interesting character.
Yeah.
So, hopefully they would carry this stuff into live action portrayals and things like that. It's actually he's played by Temuera Morrison
Mhm.
in Attack of the Clones, who also played um, Tom Curry, Aquaman's father in Aquaman. So that's like more the role I associate him with because I've seen that more. But I remember him in that movie being like way younger, and I remembered the kid that was with him and everything.
Mhm.
So this story explains that. But what confused me was because I wasn't totally on board with like where the timeline was and what was going on. When they showed the kid in the beginning, I was like, "Oh yeah, I know who that is. That's the kid from Attack of the Clones." Because of course he looks just like him because he's a clone.
Yeah.
So for like part of the story, I was going, "Oh yeah, that's Jango Fett's kid." But then they called him Jango and I was like confused. I was like, "Wait, what?" That's actually Django. And then but I figured out sort of retroactively, like, oh, okay, so this is before that movie. Like it all started to kind of add up as I went along. But
Yeah.
I think in a way, seeing the movie actually impaired my understanding of it a little bit because
Hmm.
I was trying to make connections, especially with like familiar faces that I knew. And Ramon Bachs did a good job of kind of capturing not really an exact portrait of Morrison, but more of like a cartoonified or like a caricature version of it almost.
Mhm.
But even then I was like, oh, okay, so I know who this guy is, and it took me a minute to go, no, he's actually a child right now. We're going back in time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure that all that stuff for the Star Wars fans, you're like out there screaming like, no, it was like so obvious, and they said it was before the Battle of Geonosis. But I went to your notes after I read it, and when I read a comment that you made about Geonosis, I was like, oh, now I understand where it fits in the chronology because I had forgotten what that was or the
Yeah.
significance of that. So yeah, it all tracks and it all totally makes sense. It's just my like outsider view coming in with knowledge that was like 20 years old or something wasn't wasn't super great.
Well, that's what's always
So
fun to do on these episodes is like throw one of us into a situation where it's like I don't know which way is up, and then the other person gets
yeah.
to be like the grounding. Hey, this is where we are. Everything's okay. So for the listeners out there who don't know, the Battle of Geonosis is in the movie where basically the
Hmm.
all of the Jedi Knights show up to rescue Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme, and then Jango is decapitated by Mace Windu. So 10
And there's a
years.
big green monster with like spike things for feet, right? Wasn't there? And like Padme is like riding on it or something.
Yeah,
I seem to remember.
it was like I think it was like a short body, a long tail, and a big like horn, like a rhino or
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so we'll talk about that a little bit in the after show because I have some additional comments on that.
Oh,
But for
okay.
the our purposes here, issue two begins 10 years before the Battle of Geonosis.
Okay.
So that it's 10 years before that battle where Django gets off with his head. But it does get kind of confusing because we're 10 years before that, we're watching a scene, and then it goes 20 years ago, and you're like, okay, 20 plus 10 is 30 before Geonosis. So then
Right.
Django would have been, if he was 44 when he was killed, then he would be 14 when this stuff happened. Because it
Right.
actually does matter that he's 14. He gets his first military command in a suit of armor, leading troops into battle in an extraction mission at the age of 14. Like, this is significant. This is why
And
he
he's
is,
not an idiot. He's actually
yeah,
competent. He's very
because
competent,
the
in
second in
fact.
command, Maltros, I keep wanting to say, Montross, makes a
Yeah,
mistake
Montross.
and Jaster's like, we should have got out of here, but you pushed forward instead and made this into a big disaster. But fortunately for you, Django used this to our advantage and used it as a distraction to sneak into the extraction point. So it's like
Hmm.
not only was Django paying attention, but he used someone else's mistake into a tactical advantage at 14 years
Well,
old.
it was a tactical advantage, but Jaster also got killed during
Well,
that
they didn't know that Death
sequence
Watch
of
was there,
events. Yeah,
and they didn't know
yeah.
that their intel was
I have a
wrong.
question about Montross. Actually, was he intending to switch sides to Death Watch the whole time? Because it felt like that's what they were leading to, but then I think he got killed or like, something happened to him. But it felt like he was kind of going like, I'm sick of Jaster sort of pandering to this little kid. I should be running the show. I'm smarter than him. I'm an adult. I've been here longer. And it felt like he had all the justification and even like the will to be like, I'm going to switch sides. I'm going to join Death Watch.
Mhm.
So I don't know.
So it kind of helps if you look at the Mandalorians a little bit like the armored human version of Klingons. So they're very much
Oh,
about
okay.
we have a code of
Okay.
honor.
Sure.
We care about honor. We care about battle. We test ourselves in battle. We are a race of
Mm,
warriors. And so for Montross, who is this warrior who is second in command to the Manda-Lore, which for their people, he is claiming the title of ultimate warrior. He's like, I am
sure.
Kahless. I have
Right.
the rank of Kahless in our with our people. Jaster, that's him.
Hmm.
And his second command is Montross, who's like, yeah, I'm going to be leader someday. And Jaster goes, maybe, but I just adopted this kid from a backwater agricultural planet, and I'm going to train him to be my second in command and treat him like my son. And Montross is just like, what the heck, bro? I was your protege.
Right.
I was supposed to take over. So I think he has a change of heart, not because he wants to go to Death Watch, but because he's like watching his future disappear and he doesn't want to be led by some 14-year-old kid. Like, this is a
Right.
hardened general who's been through hundreds of battles, and you want to put a kid in charge? Come
We have
on.
a lot of characters that we've been talking about recently that are second in command getting snubbed for the leadership role. We had
Yeah.
Alopex and I think Karai as well
Mm-hmm.
in the last couple episodes, and this is not an intentional trend that we've been following, but it seems like a story beat that we've been having a lot. Um,
Well, and
it
also,
actually really helps me to think of them as Klingon warriors because
mm-hmm.
I was having trouble nailing down what their code was. I got the sense from the storytelling that they were not supposed to just be mercenaries, but in my mind, I was going functionally, how are they different than just like a soldier for hire? Like it seems like that's all they are. Like governments hire them, they come
Yeah.
in, they fight for them, and they make some money and they go home. So like what sort of sets them apart? But knowing that they have kind of an honor code and all of that, I think recontextualizes the story a lot for me. I was kind of missing that information.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
so the thing is like you have the true Mandalorians who are the ones that are saying we recognize the old ways. Because the
Hmm.
Mandalorians have been around for, thousands of years or whatever in Star Wars history. And so they're like, we want to go back to the ancient ways, but we don't want the barbaric ancient ways. We want kind of a more modern. So they're sort of like it's like warrior and religion mixed in together because their code
Okay.
of honor, they're trying to follow their code of honor from, previous like Old Testament times where it's basically like an eye for an
Sure.
eye, a tooth for a tooth, but they're trying to kind of New Testament a little bit and say, okay, we want to temper that a little bit and say there are ways that we can reconcile our differences without resorting to eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So that's what the true
Sure.
Mandalorians are doing. The Death Watch Mandalorians are basically we want to go back to the savage old times when we were all barbarians. We loved it when we were
Okay.
like that. And so Death Watch is like murder, kill, yeah, let's go. They're like the terrorist
So
group.
my question about that is, was that something that I was their ideological split, something that was actually explained in the story? Because I feel like the comic actually just goes, there was a split and Death Watch is on one side and Mandalore is on the other. And I don't feel like they really got into the nitty gritty of like what their disagreement with each other was,
Hmm.
except that Death Watch was more brutal. I mean, I could see that they were more brutal by like
Yeah.
their actions, but I didn't know that there was like a disagreement over like their fundamental beliefs or something
Mhm.
like that. Was that
Yeah,
actually
so
in there and I just missed it, or is that from like other
well, yeah,
information?
there isn't much in there because there is a line at the
Okay.
beginning where they kind of give you a very brief line, and then later you see one of Tor Vizsla's men shoving a person with a cane and saying, "Move it, cripple!"
Right.
That way we know that hey, these are not nice guys. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's a line at the beginning, but the thing I'm finding out about Star Wars is there's a lot of stuff that kind of just passes you by because it doesn't make sense, and then you watch the same
Mm,
thing again, and suddenly one word that they say means a whole lot when you understand the lore and the history and the background. So,
sure.
did they explain it? They kind of did if you were, into Star Wars and Mandalorian culture, but if you weren't, then they really didn't explain it. They really could have
Okay.
set this up and framed it because when you pick this up in a vacuum, especially like you said, not seeing Attack of the Clones or any of the prequels for many, many years,
It's been a long time.
it's like,
Yeah.
wait, what's going on here? But for somebody who's seen the movies and is like, oh, Jango Fett's pretty cool and Boba Fett's pretty cool, and oh, here's a prequel that, tells you about more about Jango Fett. Oh, and here's a video game called Star Wars Bounty Hunter that takes Jango Fett on missions before he became the Prime clone.
Oh,
Let's
you
watch
actually
that.
play as him in that game? I didn't
Yeah.
realize that. That is on the PlayStation
Yeah.
Classics
There's like a
on
remaster of it.
oh, okay. Gotcha.
And we
Yeah,
will
I
talk
keep I
about it
keep
during the
seeing it
after
pop
show
up.
because it's
Oh,
actually
okay.
significant to Jango Fett and the Mandalorians. But
Well, I don't mean to keep getting ahead of us
no,
into like hey, let's talk about after show things, but it's sort of all of this lore that's surrounding it is important, and I'm trying to get like a fuller picture of what was
yeah.
happening in this story, basically. So, one of the things that I guess confused me a little bit is honestly due to the art, and I don't want to like harp on Box too much because he's clearly doing a very stylized thing, and
Hmm.
everything is in his style, and it's filtered through that, but what I will say is that the sort of more accepted Gendy Tartakovsky style that we see for the hand drawn animated stuff, and then they sort of applied that style to the CGI series that came after. That allowed for people to look closer to actors in a way, and that actually really helped me in that show as opposed to this comic because there were some things like the guy that Jango kills at the beginning. I thought that that was Vizsla. So
Hmm.
I was really confused when we went on in the story and he was alive and I was like, well, I guess they're not going to explain it. They're just going to be like, well, he somehow survived and like clearly he was in an accident because half his face is blown off and I was like, all right, I guess I just accept it. But it was really that the faces are just kind of drawn similar across the
Yeah.
board. And so it made it hard for me to tell who was who. And so because he was a guy on the Death Watch that Jango killed, I was like, oh, he killed Vizsla, and I thought he was gone in issue 1. So
I actually thought the same exact thing because the way, and I looked at it, but the way that they framed it
right,
was that you have Vizsla who punches Django's dad, and he's standing right over him, and
right,
Django is being held captive by a guy with a gun. Vizsla does not have a gun, and then in the next frame, you see somebody who's holding a gun, holding Django, saying, "I'm the law here." And then that person who's wearing a helmet gets blasted in the head and
right.
is killed. And when I saw that, I thought that was Vizsla. So I thought he died just from that. And
Okay.
I had to look at it again and I realized that it wasn't him. And then later, when Django leads everybody out into that town square where Jaster Muriel ambushes
Just a
Death
rogue.
Watch, when they get ambushed, somebody gets out of the tank and somebody gets shot by Django, and I also thought that that was Vizsla at one point too.
Right.
So then I went back and I looked at it again. I was like, oh, the sequence of events is they're both in the tank. One guy gets out, and you can actually still see Vizsla in the tank. And then Django
Mhm.
blows up the tank. So we assume that Vizsla was killed in the tank, blown up. And the guy that gets shot is actually Vizsla's second in command because he's got hair and then it like comes down over his face.
Yeah.
Whereas Vizsla's hair is like big, shaggy, like long, like Fabio hair. So
Right.
I started to have to concentrate on one important detail to differentiate everybody because, like you said, they all
Yeah.
kind of had the same like face. It's just the hair was
Well,
how you
and
could tell they were different.
when the armor is so similar too, I was confused for quite a while because coming into this story, I had done enough research to do the promo art for it. And in order to do that, I found a picture of Jango Fett. I looked at him versus Boba Fett, and I was like, "Oh, this is his color scheme. That is the defining trait that lets us know this is Jango Fett." So whenever I saw like the blue and the sort of blue and green, like the more cool tones,
Hmm.
I would associate that with Django, but then I realized by issue 2 that no, Django's not wearing that outfit. And that was actually going to be a story point later. So that made sense to me eventually. But when I was coming into the story, again, I had done research to try and keep myself from getting confused. But that actually sort of defeated me because instead of, being able to track that and going, okay, at least I know who that one guy is, it was
Hmm.
like, no, he's got to earn that, and that's going to come later.
Yeah.
So,
And that's another thing the story doesn't do very well is kind of show you that they do that it's almost like if you go with the Klingon analogy, it's like Worf's sash. It
yeah.
starts off this like kind of
Hmm.
golden thing with little frillies and then it turns into more like silver and then it turns into more ornate and it's like you said he has to earn it. So
Sure.
Django's family armor is that kind of like green tinted armor. And that's
Oh, I
actually
see.
based off of the Journeyman Protector is the name of the position that Django's dad was in, that Jaster actually used to have until he got kicked out. But that's a whole nother, you don't get that in this comic.
So
But
are the colors indicative of rank or position, or are they customized to that specific person because of family?
yes, it is
That sounds like that's
customized
right. Okay.
to the person because of family. So
Okay.
Django wore that green color because it was part of the crest that his father wore. And then
Okay.
Django then puts on Jaster's armor after Jaster is killed, which is the silver
Ah,
and red, because he is going to honor Jaster, who is his sort of like adopted father, by wearing his armor
right.
instead of his biological father's armor. But then, after Django gets captured and sold to slavery, the
Mhm.
crazy governor guy who pays to have his suit restored changes the color from red to blue. And so that is where we get the
Okay.
iconic Jango Fett in the silver and blue. Why he changed it from red to blue, I have no idea, but
So there's all of this stuff that is so knowing that would have given all of this more emotional weight than what it had for me.
yeah.
Because and honestly, thank you for the Klingon analogy because now we're going, oh, they're like houses, they care about honor,
Hmm.
they're distinguished by different colors, like all of these things. That made it make so much more sense in my brain than it did when I was coming into this story. So I was going through it and thinking this was kind of fine, but like there's all these little details in there that if you're a Star Wars fan, like I can definitely see how you would pick up on that stuff and be like, wow, they actually, they paid attention to all the little stuff, and that's really cool. Um,
Well, and conversely, if you watch the Clone Wars animated show,
mhm.
there are no true Mandalorians, but there's a different faction called the what is it like new Mandalorians? They're pacifist.
Oh,
They have nothing to do with violent action. So of course, when you have the new Mandalorians who are pacifists mixed with Death Watch, who is very much in the animated series, it's even worse because now they can't defend themselves because they're
sure.
pacifists. But the thing is, like when you watch the animated series, you get a lot of that stuff where you get to see the Mandalorian culture, and you find out they add some more to the lore where basically House Vizsla, is this prominent family, and they have connections
Oh,
to the very first Mandalorian Jedi from 1,000 years ago who wielded something called the dark saber, which was a lightsaber, but it was made of like black energy. And so
okay,
House Vizsla supposedly was the keeper of the dark saber after they stole it back from the Jedi. And
sure.
so then they kind of set themselves as like, well, Vizsla is like that name is synonymous with Death Watch because they feel
Okay.
like they have a connection to the ancient ways. So like when you start getting into the house dynamics, it sounds a lot more like Klingons and
Yeah,
politics and that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah. Um, I wanted to that all makes sense and that all makes most of the story like track better for me. I did want to say because I harped on Box and how a lot of people had a case of same face earlier, there was one moment in the art that he really nailed that I wanted to call out because it was kind of a subtle thing that I felt was handled really well. So when Django is actually fighting Vizsla at the end, there are these dire cats, right? And
Hmm.
and it jumps out and it kills Vizsla, and that's how Vizsla ultimately meets his end. Well, I noticed he had just enough, like barely in the back of the frame, when the fight started, of the dire cats creeping over a hill and looking at them. And it was like this subtle foreshadowing in the background of you seeing them get closer and closer throughout the frames. It was enough though in that first frame that I clocked it when I first read it, and I was like, "Huh, I wonder if that's going to be important later." And then, of course, a few pages later,
It
they're actually
was.
eating Vizsla. So I did think that as far as like staging the action and everything, I thought that was done really well, and I thought that was a really nice touch to be able to kind of see that coming and
Hmm.
know that it's like you see a wood chipper in a horror movie and you're like, well, I bet somebody's going to go into that, like it's a
Yeah, you kind
so
of
so
just
the art wasn't all bad. I mean,
mhm.
it was just for me, especially because I needed more info than like because I'm not like a massive Star Wars fan, I needed more info than probably the average reader. It The art was a little bit of a barrier for me following the story at
Yeah.
times. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm so conflicted on the art because that same face thing and some of the confusion that we
Right.
have kind of detracts from it. But I also kind of like the style, and I also
Yeah.
like the staging because so at the very beginning we see Dooku's ship. It takes like
Hmm.
3 panels to see it up in the sky, coming down, landing. Then we see Dooku walking out. We see him walking across a bridge. We see him slicing off tentacle on the way up. And then as
Yeah,
he
that was
rounds
cool.
his way to the stairs, that's where we get the he's far away. And then we get a close up shot of him in the panel. And you can see that it looks like Christopher Lee. So you're like, oh, this
Right.
is Dooku. But it was really cool because it's like you have like almost two whole pages before you actually
Hmm.
see who is this and what are they doing. And they did all of that just to get him to the point where he's in a tower with a meeting with Sidious just so he can give us a flashback to Django's life. And it's like, you didn't have to do that
Right.
much setup to get us there. But the framing in this was I thought it was like very
It was
solid.
cinematic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Like,
was very like I have no problems with how things were staged or I mean if Box were like a cinematographer or somebody setting up a shot for a movie or a TV show, I would be like you're doing a great job. Like that's you know, it was just those little like intimate details that
yeah.
sometimes threw me a little bit. So,
But that's what I mean. Is
I don't
like
know.
they only had 4 issues, but they took a lot of time where
Oh
the
yeah.
comic sort of breathed a little bit because there were no words, and but you had to look at the images to actually continue the story without the
Hmm.
words, which I thought was really neat. But should they have used some of that real estate to maybe explain things a little bit more instead of giving us the awesome cinema
Mm.
shots?
I'm thinking that honestly, all it would have needed for me was on the front page where they list the credits, because this is still the era of um, you open a or I'm sorry, a Dark Horse comic in this case when it was first published,
Marvel
and the
now.
first page is like here's all the credits, here's the writer, the penciler, the colorist, all those guys. They could have maybe squashed that down just a little bit and just left a blurb about who the Mandalorians are, who Death Watch is, and I think if they'd given me that bare minimum, like understanding their ideological disagreement really would have helped me a lot towards
Yeah.
caring more about the
It's
story,
like, why are
because
they after them?
not knowing why they're fighting each other except that Death Watch broke off and like clearly they're cruel, that really made it hard for me to get as invested in the story.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit of an intro curve there with just kind
Yeah.
of like getting the lay of the land of like what are we talking about? But the thing was like in 2002, it's
Hmm.
like the movie was on everybody's mind. So when a
Oh
comic comes
sure.
out, you have a lot more context to draw from because you've seen the movie, but you also have less context to draw from because there's only it's 2002. So you might have some novels to read in the 90s, but you don't have everything that we've had
Oh,
since
that's
then that's really
true.
fleshed them out. So there almost wasn't a whole lot that they
Yeah.
could tell you except to your point of if they just said the true Mandalorians are the ones who are this, the Death Watch are the ones who are that, and then
Yeah.
just or who's on what team, Death Watch
Right.
Commander Vizsla, second in command. I don't think we get his name, and then on the true Mandalorian side,
No.
just a little box like a scorecard or something. I agree. I think that would have been
Yeah.
helpful. Even me getting into it because I was more familiar with the Clone Wars animated series, where, like I said, there's the pacifists, and then there's the New Warriors or the Death Watch. Why did I say New Warriors? There's the pacifists, and then there's Death Watch. But in the comic, it's like these are the true Mandalorians. I'm like, what makes them any more true than anyone Mandalorians I've seen before? So
You're just
I could have used that too. I
I'm
don't know why
sorry,
I said New
I'm
Warriors.
so distracted by that because now I'm imagining like Speedball bouncing around with like a lightsaber in his hand. And I'm like, man, he could
Ugh.
like really hurt some people.
Or like the little training spheres that go doo doo, and then they go
Yeah.
pew pew.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I wouldn't want them to take page time away from where the story breathes, because I feel like that was a strength of it actually.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like it was paced so quickly that it was just like boom, 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 and then this happens, which could have been the case for a 4 issue, because 4 issues,
Hmm.
not a lot of time to tell a story usually, but it didn't feel rushed to me. So I don't
Yeah.
know. I did have another. It's just a quick question, but they say that the Dire Cats didn't want to. Django's like, well, maybe
Was
they
bad
thought I was
meat.
spoiled or I was bad
Yeah.
meat or something. So he had been poisoned right before that. Were they implying that that was why they didn't want to kill him? Because they don't really talk about that poison or anything later. It's just not a problem, I
Ah,
guess, and we kind of
but
moved on.
But right, because I had to look this up too. So right
Oh,
before
okay.
that, Vizsla says, haha, basically. I'm paraphrasing here, okay?
Okay.
He doesn't
Haha.
say haha. He might as well have. He basically says, haha, I've given you enough poison not to kill you, but to make you, I don't know, like
Ah,
malleable so that I can, something like that. He
that's
basically
right.
says, I've poisoned you just enough so that way it makes this easy for me so that I can finish you off myself, is basically the idea. So he
Sure.
doesn't poison him to kill him. He basically just incapacitates him. So all Django has to do is lay on the ground, and you see the montage of like we go from it's daytime to nighttime or whatever, that he was laying there for probably like 12 hours or more.
And then the kids find him at the
Yeah.
end.
So
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
he just had to wait for the poison to get out of his system because it was just enough to
Okay.
paralyze him, but not enough to kill him. So I think
Okay.
that when the lions and tigers and bears oh my were there, they probably sniffed him when the poison was in full effect. And so they were
Sure.
like, well, I ain't touching that. And so they
Yeah. Yeah.
left, and then the poison left his system, but then there was nobody around. So I think that's how that works.
It's actually a like a cat behavior thing on Earth that for one thing, like water, anytime they're gonna drink water, if there's anything remotely wrong or not fresh about it, they're not interested.
Hmm.
They're very prone to like UTIs and stuff if they don't get clean water all the time. So like we have to have like a fountain with, and they like their water to be flowing. If it's still, they're like, well, that's still water. It's probably not good. So
Hmm.
it's like an instinct thing. They need it to be like flowing and fresh, or else they won't drink it. So it actually makes sense with what we know of cat behavior here, that they
Yeah.
would see something and be like, oh, there's something wrong with that. I'm not going to eat it. Of course, then that makes me go, why did old Hob bite into the irradiated rat? But that's not a problem with this story. So
He just wanted a rat burger that bad. It just
he
sounded
did. He was like, I'm so
too
hungry.
hard to resist. If it's got a little ooze on it, I don't care. I'm so hungry.
So I was trying to, I guess not so much in a Star Trek way, but in just the story analysis way, figure out like what is this about? And it felt like a lot of what was happening was very much like the story of like what was going on in a lot of the prequel movies, which, so that dovetails into what they were doing in the movies very nicely. But this idea of like soldiers that are being used by politicians to further an agenda, like especially with the Jedi, where they came in and they didn't really know the situation and they just like slaughtered all the Mandalorians without really knowing why. And then at the end, they start to question, like, oh, maybe that wasn't a good thing that we did. And of course, Dooku after the fact is going to be like, oh man, that was such a mistake. Sorry we did that, guys. When really they're kind of orchestrating it behind the scenes. But I was getting that sense of like, it feels like the overall theme of this is sort of soldiers that are being forced to go through these horrible things at the behest of a politician that really doesn't care about them and has some kind of like agenda that just, I don't know, that struck me
So
as kind of like an
So
overriding
maybe
theme.
instead of using Star Trek for this one, we use DC Comics. Okay, I'm going to try to do my
Oh, okay,
best here.
sure, 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 sure.
So you have the Justice League. That's the
Yeah.
Jedi. They're
Hmm.
peacekeepers. They fight for good. They want to, help everybody. But then the politicians get involved. Then
Right.
bureaucracy gets involved. Then red tape gets involved. And it says, well, you can't exactly come to my planet and just enforce your rules the way that you want to. And the Justice League is like, hey, we're not trying to, dominate your planet or anything. We just see crime and corruption and we want to put a stop to it. We'll help you clean it up.
Right.
We'll respect your laws and we'll get the heck out of there. So
Hmm.
at some point of doing this for centuries, it's not the same Justice League every time, now we're talking generational. You've
Maybe
got
the Green Lantern Corps, is that maybe a better like one to
yeah,
one,
you
because
could
they're
use
a
that too.
galactic peacekeeping force that
Like,
goes to different planets.
but the thing is, though, with the Justice League analogy, the thing is like you have the Justice League who has ties to the government, and you also have at the
Sure.
same time Suicide Squad that has ties to the government. So
Right.
is the government corrupt because they have a group like the Suicide Squad? Are they not
Right.
any less corrupt because they have a group like the Justice League? Well, they're all kind of their own thing, but the thing is that Palpatine is like chess master over 9,000. Like he can see the steps
Right.
ahead. I can see what's going to happen 20 years in the future if I move some country or not countries, but now planet civilizations around this and that way. So what he does is he slowly, subtly kind of nudges people in directions to where they stop and go, wait a minute, how did I get here? Because he nudged them
Yeah.
so small over time that things just escalate so fast, and then people are like, what the heck happened? Because the Jedi got too big, too fast, tried to overstep their bounds, tried to help in this war because they thought there's a galactic war. Shouldn't we fight in it?
Right.
Shouldn't we help people who are being oppressed by the Confederacy? But then the Confederacy wasn't all bad. They weren't an evil organization. They just didn't want to be a part of the Senate. They're separatists. They want to be separate
Right.
from the Senate. Are they wrong? They have some valid points. So who's right? Who's wrong? Are the Jedi right?
Sure.
Are they good? Are they bad? The Sith say that actually the Jedi are bad. So it's like it's not
Right.
any
Right.
one
Right.
thing. It's
Okay.
basically, and what makes these stories so cool, I think, is that you get to see a slice of somebody's corner pocket of that
Hmm.
gigantic galactic mess. So here we get to see the Mandalorian culture and what Jango does to navigate this, crazy galaxy that they live in, where all of
Hmm.
this stuff is going down. And it's this like overarching, it's kind of like Dragon Ball, where you have, Goku was a kid, and then he fought Vegeta
Sure.
and Raditz, and Nappa, and then he fought Cell, and then he fought Majin Buu, and it's like all these sagas. So Star Wars has that too, where it's like you have the Old Republic, you have the High Republic, you have the Empire, you have the New Republic, and it's all these different phases.
There's
So it's like,
distinct eras. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's a lot to it like that. So when you're seeing something like this, it's supposed to be a corner of that universe.
Hmm. It occurs to me that I'm glad we went down this direction because that first of all that makes it make more sense, but also I think Django sits apart from that in a way because he's one of the only characters that gets to the end of this and he doesn't go, how did I get here? He just goes, well, what can I get out of this now?
Hmm.
Because it's like he doesn't come to a moment where he's like, man, they used us and all of this stuff. Like he ends up putting all of the blame on the Jedi. It seems like when really they were just pawns that were used
Yeah.
and had they known what was going on, they probably wouldn't have,
Well, and he shot
murdered a
first
bajillion. Exactly.
because
So
Dooku's like,
it's
"Hey, let's make this peaceful." Then his Padawan's like, "Yeah,
right,
otherwise things are gonna get rough." And so
right.
that's when Jango's like, "All right, that's it. Start shooting."
Yep. Yeah, so he started the fight too. So that I guess makes this fit again with our theming for this year a little bit because he is a character that has some edge to him. And definitely he's been through some stuff that you don't really blame him or you kind of go well like I understand why he's as upset as he is because
Yeah.
he's been dealt a raw deal basically from the time he was a little kid but it was cool to see the Jedi after the incident going, wow, I wish we hadn't done that. So they were having the realization of maybe somebody is pulling my strings, but it felt like Django himself never had that aha moment. It was more of just
Hmm.
like, well, I'm just angry now and I'm going to get back at the people that I feel are responsible. And
Yeah.
that seems like that was more what was driving him. Maybe if he would take a step back and look at the bigger picture, he would realize like, the this Darth Sidious guy and Darth Tyrannus, like they actually kind of orchestrated a lot of your pain and suffering. Like they're a lot of why you are where you are. But of course, within the confines of this story, there was no way for him to know that. So
Well, and when you're going through something, it's hard to look at yourself objectively than when you're
sure.
not. So there's that
Yeah.
that part of it too, because
Yeah.
he was going through something pretty much all the time in his story. So But yeah, he's kind of separate from that. But like, you really get to see a little snippet of Dooku here, who goes, "That was pretty much the last time that I was going to let somebody else tell me what mission to go on." And because Dooku also blamed the people that were in charge. So,
Ah, right.
so Jango blamed the Jedi, but Dooku blamed the council
Oh, so I
leaders.
was unclear on that. You're saying that Dooku himself didn't realize that they were going in to slaughter a bunch of people.
Right. And
Oh,
so
okay. Maybe because he's Christopher Lee, I just assumed he was always bad.
but that's the thing is like he actually is not bad.
Sure.
He saw that he did the same thing that Anakin does, which is
Right.
basically like, the Jedi aren't that great, actually. We've done some things that are very questionable, that are
Hmm.
not right, that, we should probably face charges for, that we did in the name of war, of the Clone Wars. So so that's kind of where Dooku is at, but he does it before everyone else. If Qui-Gon was still alive, he might have done it the same way, because we see Qui-Gon in the
Sure.
movie being kind of like a little edgy. Like when the council tells him something, he just kind of like flinches and he's like, and then I want to train this boy. No, train him. We will not. And Qui-Gon's like,
Yeah.
come on, but he's really frustrated because
Sure.
Qui-Gon was Dooku's apprentice. And so they were
Hmm.
kind of the similar thought, where it's like the Jedi Council does some things that I just don't agree with. Whereas Obi-Wan is
Right.
just like, I'll do whatever I gotta do. Yeah, we gotta fill the mission. Come on, Anakin. Calm down,
Right.
Anakin. Let's go, Anakin. All the
He's kind
time.
of the good soldier that always follows orders and is willing to he's not really questioning authority so much. If there's one thing that I like about Star Wars and about all of this discussion here, it is the kind of complexity of the politics. One of the things I love about Deep Space Nine is how complicated the politics between all the different cultures get by the end of the
Hmm.
show, where what happened to the Bajorans affects the Federation coming in, affects the Cardassian society, eventually leads them to join the Dominion, to save face, and all of these sort of dominoes. In that story, it wasn't so much that one person was orchestrating it so much as it was just, this is a chain of events and
Yeah.
one of them has led to another thing, which is very similar to how things seem to happen like in the real world. But it does feel like in Star Wars, it's definitely with Sidious or Palpatine behind the scenes, everything is just like dominoes falling. He's just like watching the dominoes fall into place. And so Django allowing himself to be used as the sort of the basis for their clone army, that was exactly what he wanted. If we have to give you a child clone, like whatever, we don't care. That's no threat to us. Um, but they even, he was the hand behind the scenes, I would assume, that caused the Jedi to make that bad call in the first place and slaughter the Mandalorians. So is he not indirectly responsible for that situation, or was that the Jedi Council that made that call? I don't know
Things
from.
are so convoluted, and it's like it's
Oh,
one of those
okay.
where the situation is bad to begin with. So even if
Sure.
somebody had good intentions, there's no way to have a peaceful resolution, because
Right.
everybody's trigger happy. And if somebody in charge had said, now wait a minute, if we send a bunch of armed Jedi over to a planet where there's a bunch of armed Mandalorians, we might have an issue. Maybe we should send a peacekeeper. But they,
Yeah, that's not what they
the
did.
Jedi are the
Yeah.
peacekeepers, so we're going to depend on our
Right.
negotiation skills. And so Dooku's like, I'm ready to negotiate. And the Padawan's like, negotiate or die. And so, that kind of sets Jango off a little bit. So,
Right.
so it's like it was a tense situation to begin with, and it just escalated quickly. But the
Yeah.
thing is like Sidious, I think of kind of like, if there was an evil Peter Parker, and please not bully Maguire, but but Peter Parker, who is a photographer for the Daily Bugle, takes
Okay.
pictures of himself as Spider-Man defeating enemies. So he uses Spider-Man's identity to give Peter Parker money to pay his bills. And then Peter
Sure.
Parker's money to pay his bills gives Spider-Man a place to sleep and be safe when he's not fighting crime. So the
Right.
two separate identities benefit from each other. So that's really what Palpatine does as the
Mm,
Chancellor and as the Sith Lord is that he has these two separate personas, and one's a secret identity, one's a public identity, and he
okay.
uses both of them at the same time as if they were separate people. So when you watch the movies, you almost think that they are separate people because
Right.
on the one hand you see this guy and he's like, "Oh, that's just so great. Well, we'll see about this and we'll go and do that." And then you see this guy and he's like,
Mhm.
"What is the status of the project?" And you're like, "Whoa, who's that guy?" It's the same guy, but it's like Peter Parker, Spider-Man. It's like they're different
Yeah.
personas and they're secret from each other in everybody's mind.
Okay. Yeah. Never would I have thought that that would be a parallel that you would draw, but okay. But no, that makes
Everything
perfect
comes back
sense.
to Spider-Man, don't you
It
know?
does. It does.
All right, well, are
Oh,
you ready for our final thoughts?
I think so.
All right,
I think
let's
so.
run on over there.
Boom, 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 boom. Do you mind if I go first for this one?
Go right for it.
So this has been one that's really difficult for me to rate because I'm trying to decide, do I rate it based on the information I had when I first read it, or do I rate it based on my new understanding that I have after this discussion? Because those are two separate
Different.
things.
Yeah.
So I think that like I probably would have before talking to you given it like a 3 just because there were enough things that were confusing, that were like hard for me to follow, and I didn't have like the emotional investment in Django that I felt like I needed to like really care about the conclusion and stuff like that. But it wasn't a poorly implemented story. So I was thinking about a 3 in the beginning, but with all that we've talked about, I'm like, well, this feels more like a 4 level of quality, right? Because it's actually like addressing all these things within the Star Wars lore, and it's kind of fleshing some things out for the fans. You have the benefit of all this knowledge coming in and kind of making this story richer. So because I'm torn between those two ideas, I think I'm going to land on a 3.5. I think that this was a well told story. And now that we've talked through it, because we have this podcast, I'm able to appreciate what W. Hayden Blackman and Raymond Bachs were doing a lot more than I was when I just kind of read it cold and had sometimes old information and sometimes just completely inaccurate, badly memorized information about Star Wars. So yeah, I think it's gonna sit right between the 3 and the 4 for me, where I feel like this was a good story. The only things that I could really say were wrong with it had to do with the same face aspect being confusing about who was who and what character was getting killed when and things like that. But I don't think that ruined the story, and there's enough context as you read through it that even if you're not a Star Wars fan, I think you'll be able to pick up and follow it by the time you get to the
Mhm.
end. Because that was pretty much how I was. Like when I got to the end, I was like, oh, okay, this is all like clicking and making sense now. So yeah, I think a 3.5 out of 5 is about where I'm going to land on
Okay.
this. So.
Yeah, I had some of the same or pretty much the same issues that you did, and it took going back to that section and reading it for me to go, oh,
Mhm.
they actually did tell us. I just didn't pick up on it when I was reading this. So I was
Sure.
kind of like at first taking points away for that, but then I realized, oh, it was kind of my fault more so that I was like,
Sure.
well, maybe that's not their fault. They could have portrayed it a little bit better, especially that part with Vizsla and then swapping places with the second in command that's got,
Yeah.
Jango to gunpoint. That was really confusing. But they did so many other cinematic shots that were really cool in that like 10-page fight. I mean,
Mhm.
in a 4-issue miniseries, you use 10 pages with like no words. I mean, that's pretty amazing. So,
It does speak to like a high quality bar of being able to tell a story with images.
mhm.
So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So I no, it's right. And so I kind of did like you did a little bit where it's like I sort of had an initial feeling about it, and then I have sort of a after getting more out of it feeling from it.
Hmm.
But mine, instead of being bounced between a 3 and a 4, were balanced more between a 4 and a 5. Because I actually
Hmm.
started to go the 5 direction when I did some more research to find out, about what all of this meant, to fill in the blanks, and then realized that there was actually more to Django's story than we get just in this one comic. And so it made me want to do research. It made me want to watch a video on the history of Jango Fett, even if the person talking was really hard to listen to. I was still interested in the material. So that kind of gave me that, like, because there's so many videos out there like that. It's like, oh my gosh, like your voice is
There's
annoying.
somebody that's really monotone.
Yeah. So
Or
Jango Fett was born in, and he went over here, and then Vizsla attacked his farm, and oh no, and then, his
it's like,
parents.
well, I'm glad you're so excited about the material.
Ah! So that kind of made me go like closer to the 5, where I was like getting really
Okay.
excited.
Okay.
And I think, that's really what I want out of something, is if I read something and I go, wow, that was really good, I want to read more. That for me
Hmm.
is like high, like the best thing that
Yeah.
you could ask for. It makes me want to come back for more. But there were a few things that were a little bit rocky. And while, I was like, it's really cool that they made Django into like a character that you actually care about, who seems like he's actually
Hmm.
cool. There was still like, we could have done things a little bit better. We could have explained it a little bit better. We could have, framed it in to kind of help. This is the start of the story. So it could have been a little bit more polished. Do I want to take too many points away for that? Not so much. So I figure I'll just do what
Sure.
you did, go in the middle. So I'll go with a
Yeah.
4.5. So 4.5 out of 5 bananas for me, and that
Okay.
will make our average score a 4 out of 5 bananas, which is
Right.
still is that ripe or delicious? I don't remember what our scale is, but
I think that's at least ripe. I think delicious is a 5, isn't it? But it's at least ripe.
yeah,
Yeah,
maybe.
I mean, I'm pretty happy with us averaging out there. I feel like that's a good place for this one to land, where it's kind of like,
Yeah.
yeah, there may be some minor problems with it. If you're a Star Wars fan, I would say I would definitely recommend it. If you're not necessarily engrossed in the Star Wars universe, you can still get at least a 3.5's worth of enjoyment out of it. I do want to say, whenever we give like a 3 or something like that, I don't want people to hear that as this is a bad score. That's more of like, it was just a fine story. It didn't
Hmm.
knock my socks off. That doesn't have to mean that it's bad. And in fact, I don't need everything that I read to be a 5 out of 5 for it to
Yeah.
be worth reading. So I don't want
Right.
people to take that and be like, well, he just hated it or whatever. It's like, no, I enjoyed it. I just, I thought there were some things they could improve. So,
Right. Well, and you wouldn't want to read something that makes you want to read more Star Wars, because you don't really want to read more Star Wars anyway. Not that it's
you
bad,
know,
but it's just not somewhere you'd rather read Star Trek or New 52
so
or Fantastic
So
Four.
on that note,
Fantastic Four.
on that note,
Do, do, do.
I have, well, this is something that will be addressed in listener comments in the after show, but I have gigantic franchise burnout in a way. So that's something that one of the listeners actually did call out or say something about. But these things that are like these massive universes, right now there's just too many of them. And I feel like if I'm going to follow something and actually understand all of it, for me it's gonna be Star Trek. At least I've already got the investment in that, where I know most of the background and I can keep up with it and it's not too much trouble. For me to catch up on Star Wars right now would be so many hours of viewing and reading and all this stuff, that it feels like this insurmountable task that I could like never get caught up, because there's so much of it now. Whereas before I could be like, well, I've seen the movies, so I kind of know what's there.
Well,
So
but at the same time, you didn't acquire all of that Star Trek knowledge in a week. It took you
sure,
years
it
of
did.
exposure to it to get that. So it's kind of the same thing with Star Wars, is like, we started watching it when The Mandalorian came out, and then
Mm.
slowly over time, another show would come out, or between shows, we would go back and watch another show that we hadn't watched before. Like, I don't know if I want to watch this Clone Wars thing, or this weird looking, what's Star
Okay.
Wars Rebels? A bunch of goofy looking dudes. Like, why do we care? But but as I got into it more, I started to go, I kind of want to see if that's any good. And then I'm like, wow, Rebels is
Sure.
freaking amazing. Like, why hasn't that
Hmm.
been made into something, that's mainstream? And like the Clone Wars is really good and they take you on all these different avenues. And, and then something new would come out and I'd be like, ooh, I want to prepare for Ahsoka by reading the novel and looking at some comics
Okay.
and do this. And so it's like you build that fandom over time. And that's what you've done
Hmm.
with Star Trek. So
It
to
is.
go, I'm going to
And with
catch up in a
DC
week.
as
Yeah,
well. Yeah.
not not good. Same thing. Yeah, if I wanted to read all of New 52, I there's no way I couldn't do it.
You
But
know what?
how
I can't believe that I've done that, honestly. It's insane that I did
but
that.
how did you do it?
But
Over time.
over time, that's right.
And because you wanted to.
Yeah,
That's
because I
important.
wanted to.
So
I wanted to get into it. But yeah, it's just I don't want you to read it as this sort of old world attitude of, well, I have to like one over the other. I have to like Star Trek and I can't like Star Wars because I like Star Trek. Like there was some of that back in the day because that was the culture, but that's not where I'm coming from now. It really has more to do with it just I didn't grow up with it as much, and so I don't have that sort of background knowledge.
mhm.
And it feels like to me, again, just from my point of view, it feels like it would be homework at this point for me to catch up, so to speak. And I
Yeah.
realize I shouldn't be trying to catch up. I should just find something that I like and sort of it's like it's the advice you give anybody about comic books, right? They go, "Well, I want to read DC Comics. Where do I start?" Well, what you do
Mm.
is you find a single character that you like and you read just their book. And
Yeah.
so if you like Green Arrow, just read Green Arrow. And then you can decide after you're reading that if you want to branch out into other properties or if you're just going to kind of stay in that lane. So that's another way to sort of learn about a fandom and pick a lane without having to be overwhelmed by there's all of this content.
Right. Well, and that's what's cool about crossovers too, is like you start reading Green Arrow, and then there's the Flash. He shows up, and they have a little, an issue where they talk about something, and then he goes on his way, and then you're like,
Mhm.
hey, that Flash character was kind of cool. I wonder what his book is like, and then you read that,
Right.
and then and then you're like, oh, what's the Justice League? What are the um other groups that you want to look into and go,
Justice
oh,
Society, the
Justice
Doom Patrol,
Society and
the
yeah,
Titans, I don't know.
Titans. That's what I was trying to think
Yeah,
of.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
and the
Yeah.
Titans and groups like that. Like you
Mhm.
want to, then you start branching out after that, but you don't start by
Right.
branching out right away. But the thing is, it's like I like to pick on you because you would have that attitude of like it's either Star Wars or Star
Oh
Trek,
yeah.
but
Oh, I know.
only because it's funny, not
Oh, I
because I
know.
actually am like, oh, he's a Star Wars hater. Because most of the people who hate Star Wars are the ones who love it because they're like,
Yeah.
this is Jango Fett. This movie or this whatever is not Jango Fett. And if you don't like it, I'm a member of Death Watch. There will be war, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I have enough history and fandom with Star Trek to get legitimately angry about story decisions. But I don't know that, so that's a good point in a way, is like I don't know that I've ever developed the same passion for Star Wars. So like when they make some sort of major canon alteration, when you explained in the retrospective video, I can kind of after the fact go, ooh, yeah, that sounds like it kind of sucks. Or I
Mhm.
can even reading this story today, I can kind of go, man, it's a shame that we lost some of this legend stuff because it seems like it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to come into it with the same level of like angst as I would when they retcon a secret sister into Spock's family that was a human adopted by Sarek, and things that just don't make sense. So
Right.
yeah, it makes sense. It's very funny to be like, well, it's the people that really care about Star Wars that hate it.
Pretty much. Well, and
that makes
it's
that makes
like
sense.
with One
Yeah,
More Day and Spider-Man too. It's like,
yeah,
I
uh-huh.
wasn't reading these issues as they were coming out, but going back and reading them, I can really get like, wow, why did they do this? And then I can explain
Right,
it to you, and you haven't read it, but I walked you through, what happened
sure,
and how they came back again, and how they came back again, and how they took the original material and changed it to fit what they were trying to do and made it even worse. And it's like, so you
yeah,
don't even have to read the issues to get how like, oh my gosh, what a terrible thing to do.
sure,
So it's like there's different different levels of it. But hopefully
Yeah,
everyone listening
absolutely.
has enjoyed some level of what we've been talking about.
Hopefully so.
But hopefully. But until then, that's going to wrap up this episode of We Like Comics because they have no bones. Make sure you head on over to our YouTube channel at Boneless Comics Podcast, where you can watch the video version of this episode and join us for the after show, where we'll discuss
After
the writer
show.
and penciler from our story today and dive deeper on Jango Fett. And here's some listener comments as well.
So I was wanting to say something about the diving deeper and the Sarlacc pit, but that's Boba Fett, not
That's
Jango
Boba
Fett. So
Fett.
it won't work.
It
So
landed flat,
yeah, everybody,
not Fett.
during the after show, we're going to be covering your comments. There actually are quite a few this time, and we're going to be giving some shout outs specifically to a new channel of a friend of mine. So be sure to check that out. Be sure to share your thoughts on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast or on Blue Sky Social or X at
X.
Boneless Comics One. And use the hashtag Boneless Comics Podcast to let us know what you think of Star Wars Jango Fett open seasons.
I tried to make it a little faster so that way it wasn't so annoying. But if you're still here, you should check out our website at bonelesscomicspodcast.com, where you can get additional information about us, your hosts, and a link to our new Prettify shop where you can order Mike's banana designs on t-shirts, mugs, and more.
Wait, that's not a banana design.
Oh,
Yes, and next episode, we're going to be taking a look at Star Trek Halloween. That's spelled like holodeck, not Hallow, but Halloween. Written by Chris Sequeira, penciled by Joe Eisma and Charlie Kirchhoff, and published in 2023 by IDW Publishing, so don't miss it.
All right, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you later.
Catch you later.
Comics.
Lightsaber sounds.